Building a sustainable supply chain involves implementing strategies for ethical sourcing, responsible procurement, and supply chain transparency to minimize environmental impact, promote social responsibility, and ensure ethical business practices throughout the supply chain. Here are strategies for building a sustainable supply chain. Supplier assessment and due diligence. Conduct supplier assessments and due diligence to evaluate the social, environmental, and ethical performance of suppliers and subcontractors. Establish criteria for supplier selection based on sustainability criteria such as labor practices, environmental stewardship, human rights, and compliance with regulations and standards. Supplier code of conduct. Develop and implement a supplier code of conduct that outlines the expectations, requirements, and standards for ethical sourcing and responsible business practices. Communicate the code of conduct to suppliers, contractors, and business partners, and require them to adhere to the principles and guidelines outlined in the code. Supplier engagement and collaboration. Foster collaborative relationships with suppliers and engage them as partners in sustainability initiatives and improvement efforts. Work with suppliers to identify opportunities for improvement, share best practices, and collaborate on sustainability projects such as reducing carbon emissions, conserving resources, and improving labor conditions. Transparency and traceability. Promote transparency and traceability throughout the supply chain by tracking and documenting the origin, production processes, and movement of raw materials, components, and finished products. Implement supply chain mapping, traceability systems, and blockchain technology to trace product origins, verify compliance, and identify potential risks or issues. Certifications and standards. Require suppliers to adhere to recognized sustainability certifications, standards, and guidelines such as Fair Trade, Forest Stewardship Council, FSC, Rainforest Alliance, Organic, Responsible Wool Standard, RWS, or ISO 14001, Environmental Management System. Verify compliance with certification requirements through audits, assessments, and verification processes. Risk assessment and mitigation. Identify and assess risks associated with social, environmental, and ethical issues in the supply chain, such as child labor, forced labor, environmental pollution, and human rights violations. Develop risk mitigation strategies and contingency plans to address potential risks, improve supply chain resilience, and ensure business continuity. Supplier capacity building. Invest in supplier capacity building initiatives to enhance the sustainability performance and capabilities of suppliers. Provide training, technical assistance, and support to suppliers to improve their environmental management practices, labor standards, and compliance with ethical sourcing requirements. Incentives and recognition. Offer incentives, rewards, and recognition to suppliers that demonstrate strong commitment to sustainability, ethical sourcing, and responsible business practices. Recognize suppliers for their achievements, performance improvements, and contributions to sustainability goals, and incentivize continuous improvement through positive reinforcement. Collaborative initiatives and partnerships. Collaborate with industry associations, NGOs, government agencies, and other stakeholders to support collaborative initiatives and partnerships that promote sustainable sourcing practices, address common challenges, and drive collective action on sustainability issues. Participate in multi-stakeholder initiatives, industry working groups, and sustainability platforms to share knowledge, resources, and best practices. Continuous improvement and monitoring. Establish mechanisms for continuous improvement and monitoring of sustainability performance in the supply chain. Set clear targets, metrics, and key performance indicators, KPIs, to measure progress, track performance against sustainability goals, and identify opportunities for improvement. Conduct regular audits, evaluations, and reviews to assess compliance, identify gaps, and drive continuous improvement efforts. By implementing these strategies and adopting a holistic approach to ethical sourcing and sustainability in the supply chain, businesses can mitigate risks, enhance brand reputation, create value for stakeholders, and contribute to a more sustainable and responsible global supply chain ecosystem.